Welcome back to Wishwell Farms, everybody, to this warm, delightful environment inside my greenhouse. Today I'm cutting off tomatoes. Well, thanks for tuning in today, guys. I'm back in greenhouse number 1. I call it my tall house because it's about 18 feet tall. It's got a ridge vent on top. It's not a normal Quonset shaped greenhouse. So the tall house is where we're at today. And like I said in the intro, we're snipping fruit off the plants. You might be asking yourself, why in the world would I want to cut profit off of my high value greenhouse tomatoes? There are several reasons that we do this, and that is what we're going to get into in today's video. So the first reason we want to prune these tomato clusters down to maybe 3 or 4 fruit is to allow us to have larger tomatoes to sell at the farmers markets. If we let every tomato fruit out to maturity, we might have 6, 7, even 8 or 9 tomatoes on each cluster. That may sound better to have more tomatoes, but a lot of those tomatoes are not going to get much larger than golf balls. We want big slicers, big beefsteak tomatoes. That's what people want at the farmers market. Yes, there is a place for smaller tomatoes, but we get plenty of them later in the season when the plants have kind of run their course and starting to fizzle out a little bit. But early in the season, we want big tomatoes. So that's the first reason. The second reason is if we let all those tomatoes mature on the plant and not prune them off, there's only a certain amount of big, good tomatoes that a plant is going to give us. And let's say early on the first cluster, which is what I'm going to be trimming up today, if I was to leave 7 tomatoes on every cluster, let's say, the next cluster might do decent, but by the time we get to cluster 3, 4, or 5, I almost guarantee you that no matter how well you are feeding these plants and how perfect the environment is that they're growing in with temperature and humidity and light, there is going to be a blank cluster. A cluster that does not even form fruit. It might flower out, it might even get pollinated by the bees, but because of the stress of producing so many tomatoes early on, that plant is going to abort that cluster and skip it, sometimes even skip the next one before it finally starts giving us more fruit to harvest. And a lot of times when that has happened in the past, until I pick the first cluster and sometimes the second cluster, then the tomato will be like, okay, now it's time to reproduce again and let's put some more tomatoes on the plant. So those are the 2 main reasons that we do this. Now, I'm sure there's more than 2 reasons for fruit pruning, but those are the 2 main reasons that I've been taught and that the kind of a rule of thumb that I've followed over the years. So it has worked out good for us, and today I want to show you how we decide which tomatoes to cut off the fruit cluster. All right, so I have a fruit cluster in front of me that I'm going to demonstrate this on. I see 3 very nice sized tomatoes. They're about dime size or better. And then we got one little guy that's a pea size, and then one that's just pollinated and hasn't formed yet. So this is a really simple one to trim. All I'm going to do is bring my scissors in here and cut those off. And I'll discard that into my little pail here. Now we have 3 nice tomatoes. Now a lot of times I will leave 4. I would prefer to leave 4 because we want more tomatoes, and I can usually get decent sized fruit by leaving 4 behind. The reason I'm not leaving 4 behind this year is because my plants did stretch a little bit more than normal this year, and I did find out why that was happening. I'll explain that in just a second. So the reason I'm going down to 3 on this and not 4 is because I'm looking at my branches that I have here. These are the cotyledons. We don't count the cotyledons. Those are the 2 first little leaves that come out of the seed. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's not too bad. If there was 9 there, I would feel more comfortable leaving 4 tomatoes. Now, I've been counting some of these branches on these other plants, and a lot of them are only 7 branches. I even found a couple with only 6 branches. That is not good. I don't know what caused that. Some of you may know and maybe will explain that to me in the comments, but from my research, my knowledge, and from talking to other growers and people at Crop King here in Ohio, that when your plant only has 6 or 7 branches, you better trim your first cluster down to 2 or 3 fruit, or you're going to pay for it later on at cluster maybe 4 or 5. That's where it's going to like skip those clusters. It's going to kind of abort those and move on up the plant. And then you're in a world of hurt, because if it happens all at the same time, you're going to have an entire greenhouse of nothing to harvest when you're on cluster 4 and 5. And that could be a critical time of the year that we need tomatoes at the farmers markets. It might be when green beans are starting, or sweet corn is starting, or it could be a little earlier, maybe when we're still in strawberry season in June. Either way, that's a lot of tomatoes to miss out on. So by taking a little bit of a hit early on, by trimming it down to maybe 2 or 3 tomatoes, that will ensure us a better chance of having no clusters aborting their fruit or not being pollinated and giving us fruit to harvest on cluster 4 and 5. That seems to be when I've seen it happen to us the most. Sometimes maybe cluster 3, but it seems to be around 4 or 5. Now, once we get to cluster 7, that is when we begin to harvest. And they'll be above the cables by then. We'll have already lowered them, and the ripe fruit will be down here right by the bucket, sometimes even touching the ground. So I always know that when I see cluster number 7 starting to form fruit or flowered out, I know we're real close to getting ready to harvest. And that first cluster of tomatoes, it'll be down here, because we'll have dropped the plants by that time. They'll be ready to go. So as soon as we start harvesting that first cluster, it kind of alleviates the plant a little bit. I don't know the best way to explain that. And then I don't have to worry about blank clusters as much, or the plant not forming clusters of fruit for us. So if that does happen, because we've left too many on the plant early on, and we end up getting some blank clusters on cluster 4 and 5, usually by the time we get to 7 and we start picking cluster number 1, I don't have to worry about that happening anymore. So it is kind of a little game you're playing here. Do I trim them real hard right now, take a little bit of a hit early in the season around Memorial Day for us, middle of May to Memorial Day, and maybe just barely have enough tomatoes, but that will ensure me of not running out of tomatoes when we get to cluster 4 and 5. So hopefully that explains it. That's why we do it. All right, let's get to fruit pruning. Now, everything I just explained is a lot easier said than done. Look at this beautiful cluster of tomatoes. And this is the way most of them look right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tomatoes on this cluster, and a 7th one that hasn't formed its tomato yet. You don't know how bad I want to leave 4 tomatoes on this plant, but I'm gonna trim it down to 3. I'm gonna cut it off right there. You know, I probably waited too long. I really should have done this when they were all marble to pea size. Once they're this big, you know, it may have already been taken away from the plant. So we want to do this early on. I almost waited too long here. Let's count the branches on this one. 1, and there's a little sucker. We'll get into sucker pruning at another time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that 7th one is above the cluster, so that's really going towards the next one. This one's kind of a branch off of the cluster, so I'm not sure if you can count that. But yeah, unfortunately, I have to trim that cluster down to 3. Makes me sad, but those 3 tomatoes will be huge, and I know it's going to pay dividends later on when cluster 4 and 5 are up here. All right, I want to show you something that happened here. Yesterday I was pruning suckers, and you can see this little sucker right here. Looks like a little baby plant. This one got topped, so there was a big sucker right here. I picked the sucker off and it snapped the top, and it was beyond repair. Sometimes if they just snap a little bit, you can tape them back up with black electrical tape. This one was too far gone. I had to just take the top off. Luckily, I had not pruned that sucker, because now I'm going to let this new sucker grow and become the new top. And this plant will still produce normally for the most part. So here's another cluster. You can see this one has a little leaflet on the end of the cluster. I call those plumes. I'm not sure if that's the right terminology, but we're going to trim this one down to 3. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 tomatoes on that plant. Snip, snip. We're down to 4. Take the next smallest one off. There we go, 3 nice tomatoes left. Now, if you're wondering how I decide which tomatoes to take off, I'm always trimming the smallest ones off that are further out on the tomato truss. So like on this one, I'm gonna keep the biggest 3 tomatoes. You can see that there. And I'm gonna trim off these 2 right there. So usually the smallest ones are further out. The closer these tomatoes are to the stalk, the less likely this tomato truss is going to bend, fall over, and kink later on when these get heavy. And we'll talk about supporting this with plastic J-hooks later on when they get bigger. So this is my opportunity to trim away any ugly fruit that maybe had bad pollination, is a little bit deformed, or the smaller fruit further away from the plant. So we're always keeping the 3 biggest. Later on we'll be keeping 4 on all these plants, but today we're trimming them all down to 3 because it's the first cluster pruning. So yeah, the uglier ones or the smallest ones and the ones furthest away from the stalk are getting a cut today. Here's another good example. I would love to keep 4 on that one. Normally in the past I would, but this year we're going to cut them down to 3 and kind of see how it goes. You know, the horticulturalist at Crop King even told me on some of these plants that only have 6 or 7 branches below their first cluster, he would recommend cutting them down to 2. I can't do that. Even if it's the right thing to do, I'm taking my chances. I feel like I need to keep at least 3 tomatoes on there. If I cut them all down to 2, I'm going to be way short-handed come Memorial Day weekend when we need lots and lots of tomatoes. Snip. Snip. Yes, I am picking up all these tomatoes. I just can't do it while I'm filming because I'm holding the scissors in one hand and the camera in the other hand. So the main reason my plants stretched so much this year while they were in the transplant stage in my starter house is because I didn't realize that the nitrogen source that I was feeding them that was in my, my 9-15-30 analysis mix had ammoniacal, I think that's how you say it, ammoniacal nitrogen. Didn't have any nitrate nitrogen. Now, the calcium nitrate that I was adding in addition to the 9-15-30 is all nitrate nitrogen. So next year, when I'm fertilizing my starts, I'm going to make sure the mix has no ammoniacal nitrogen. I'd rather it be almost like a 0-15-30, for example. You know, that first number is nitrogen. I don't want any ammoniacal nitrogen in it. And then I can add my own nitrate nitrogen to bring up the amount of nitrogen I need in my starter fertilizer. So, yep, that is the main reason we had a lot of stretch. Ammoniacal nitrogen is found in a lot of your fertilizers for in your garden centers, your big box stores, because it works really fast. It makes things green, it makes things grow, and you'll feel like you're doing a really good job by seeing a big green, fast growing plant, right? But when there's low light, short days, and you're starting transplants in the winter, specifically tomatoes, you don't want any ammoniacal nitrogen in your mix. You know, I was thinking about something today. I complain a lot about my greenhouses, and I probably shouldn't, because this really is a great place to be when it's nasty outside. Even though spring began 2 days ago, it's like 28 degrees with a ½ inch of snow out there. It feels like the dead of winter again. And when it's like that outside, I don't mind being in here in these greenhouses. I actually kind of enjoy it. You know, it's peaceful, it's quiet, and as long as I come out here for an hour or 2 a day, I can pretty much do everything myself, at least in this one greenhouse. Now, once we get all of them up and running, they all need suckered, they all need fruit pruned, and you know, just all the other plant maintenance that we'll be getting into later in the season. There's no way I can do it on my own. Plus, I'm busy out in the fields. But this time of year, when we can't be out in the fields and I don't really want to work outside around the barn or anything like that, it is nice to be in here in the greenhouses. And this is 23 years, 20, something like that. Yeah, 20 some years I've been growing tomatoes in greenhouses. 19 years in this greenhouse. Yeah, we built this one in 2005. So yeah, it's flown by. Can't believe how long I've been working in greenhouses. And I feel like I've learned a lot, But you know what? There's always something else to learn. Every year I learn something new. Like this year, I learned about how many branches are supposed to be below the first cluster. I never really knew that. All these years of growing, I never knew that. I know that there's usually 3 branches between clusters, once you get up above cluster 1, but the first cluster should have about 8 or 9 branches below it, and some of ours have 6 or 7. So yeah, there's always something to learn out here, and I got to stop complaining about owning and working in greenhouses. It is as bad as dairy farming. I dairy farmed for my first 28 years of my life. I'm a 4th generation dairy farmer, was a 4th generation dairy farmer. I'm just a 4th generation farmer now, I guess a vegetable farmer. But yeah, milking cows, you can never get away from them unless you have a good hired man to watch things while you're gone. But yeah, that's twice a day, and there's always something going on the dairy farm. Those of you who have milked cows or know anything about dairy farming know exactly what I'm talking about. But I think the greenhouses are just as bad this time of year. It's a lot of work, and I just feel like I can't get out of here. Now, once we get rolling in the middle of summer and I have all my employees here, and all the kinks are worked out of the system and everything's working like a well-oiled machine, then I can get away and do a little backpacking and kayak camping, because I'll have people here to kind of watch things. But this time of year, it's basically just me and maybe a few family members that come out from time to time to help me. So yeah, even though I complain about the greenhouses, they have treated us well, and it is a really nice place to work when it's cold outside. Well, this is where we're going to end the video today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again real soon down on the farm.